What's up everybody, this is Jose from Southern Life. On today's video, we're going to talk about the truth about the US-Mexican border. We recently took a trip down to the Texas border through the Chihuahuan Desert and right up to the border with the United States and Mexico. And you may have been hearing a lot of misinformation. And I'm going to be honest, this video may not be for all of our subscribers. So if you believe what you're being told about the US-Mexico border on whatever TV show you're watching every night, you may not even want to watch this video because you're not going to like what I'm going to tell you, which is basically my personal opinion about what I saw along the US-Mexico border. So if the truth is something you're going to have trouble dealing with, perhaps this video is something you just want to turn off. But if you want to hear my real opinion about this area, let's go right ahead and get into it. It is probably one of the most well-patrolled and orderly places that I have seen in the United States. And if you're driving down to the Mexico border to do something illegal, you'll see so much police presence and so many government agencies around that you may change your mind about what you're about to do. If you're familiar with the East Coast of the United States, going into Mexico feels like going into Washington, D.C., where the highways are very clean, there's a lot of police presence, there's a lot of cameras, and you know you're being watched through different angles. A lot of criminal activity is probably not found along the US border because there's so much government presence that it just doesn't create a comfortable environment for most crimes. Many of the border cities along the Texas border have some of the lowest murder rates in the entire country, and most criminal activities that are not related to humans or drug trafficking are not going to be found here because it just isn't the type of place that lends itself very well to this type of activity considering how much police presence there is. Many of the border towns that we found were actually in really good condition with new homes and new businesses going in. You will see strange things along the US-Mexico border, like cars traveling in caravans, people on ATVs with walkie-talkies, and other activities that will seem suspicious. But nonetheless, the area is so well patrolled, even in the more desolate regions, that it seems like those who are involved in criminal activity that we mentioned are going to have to be pretty much professionals and well equipped to counteract the government surveillance. In other words, most criminal activity here is very well organized, and most street level crime is just pretty much overkilled by the immense police presence. Before we went to this region, our subscribers told us that this area was under patrolled and that it was completely out of control. I would actually say that there's so much government presence here that most street level crime is almost non-existent. Compared to other countries that share a border, the US-Mexico border is probably one of the most orderly border crossings you're going to find. There are other countries in Europe that have a much better trade relationship and less strategic geographical location that lends itself perfectly for all types of illicit activity. Therefore, they have a much better border situation. But there's countries even in the Americas, like the United States around Puerto Rico, or the Dominican and Haitian border that have a much more serious border concern. Therefore, the Caribbean region is overlooked as a very dangerous corridor, which it is for a lot of dangerous illegal activities. And it almost seems like a vast majority of the misinformation based around the US-Mexican border is simply a narrative of racism towards Hispanic American culture. Take, for example, the United States state of Alabama, where half of the Latino population is illegal. Of course, in Texas, they have a much larger Hispanic population. Only 6% of the Latino population in Texas is illegal, because this massive police and border patrol presence and other government agencies means that most of Texas doesn't lend itself very well to not having papers. So while states like Alabama criticize places like Texas for their border situation, they actually have about 10 times more illegal people by percentage than the places they're criticizing, which means there's a massive misinformation agenda to make places like Texas seem like they're out of control, when in reality it is one of the best controlled environments in the United States when it comes to the illegal immigration situation. In case you didn't hear me, 50% of the Hispanic population in Alabama is illegal. 6% of the Hispanic population in Texas is illegal. So which one of these two states really has an illegal immigrant problem? Is it the border state of Texas or the state of Alabama, which on the exterior proclaims to have everything under control with laws that really have limited legal Hispanics from going to their state, with inhumane and unconstitutional laws? All the while Texas, without bending the laws, without being inhumane, has managed to control one of the most difficult border crossings in the world. Let's compare crime in some of these Texas cities to crime in some of the other states that are further inland, like Alabama. Many of the border towns, like for example McAllen, El Paso, have murder rates that are below the national average, which is seemingly hard to obtain for urban areas since rural areas don't usually have this type of crime. On the other hand, the state of Alabama, with cities like Mobile, Montgomery, Huntsville, and Birmingham, have murder rates that are between 4 to 10 times the national average. In 2022, many U.S. cities like St. Louis, Baltimore, and Birmingham, Alabama, are going to have murder rates much higher than places like Mexico and Salvador. So while many Americans proclaim that the U.S.-Mexico border is dangerous, the metropolitan area that they live in can be as much as 5 times more likely to get you whacked than actually living in a border town along the US-Mexico border. Now, what happens south of that border is a completely different situation. However, we're not talking about what happens on the other side of that border. We're talking about what's happening along the United States side. What's happening on the other side of the Rio Grande is definitely of concern. And many Mexican national businessmen are starting to make their homes and their communities on the Texas side and travel back into Mexico because it is just far too dangerous for them to live in a place where kidnapping, ransom, and other types of illegal activity are absolutely rampant. And many of the Mexican nationals are starting to build very beautiful, massive homes in Texas, in particular along the US-Mexico border, and many places like San Antonio are known for being safe grounds for many Mexican nationals of good monetary value. We're picking American cities for their safety. While having large monetary enterprises in Mexico, they would rather reside in the United States. And while many people say that you cannot come to the United States legally if you're Mexican, that's really a misconception. If you have enough money and enough businesses, nothing is impossible. It's in a small town called Zapata, based on its geographical location in a very isolated place that's wrapped around the Mexican border. I thought this place would absolutely be terrifying based on everything I heard about the US-Mexican border. We entered the town and we encountered game wardens, border patrol, local police, and we also saw private security. I mean, literally, this place has more security than Mar-a-Lago. And honestly, I don't know what's more terrifying, being 10 minutes away from Tamaulipas or being 10 minutes away from Lake Worth. Other than the safety, which is completely under control, there were many new businesses going in. Many of the homes were very beautiful. The area was actually scenic and lovely all the way around. And despite being right next to Tamaulipas, one of the most dangerous states in Mexico, it seemed like overall this part of the state was actually beautiful, with large homes in all directions and plenty of new businesses on the up and coming. I expected boarded up businesses with graffiti on the side. In fact, there were so many new businesses going in that you can almost call this a miniature boomtown. Would I recommend that you move your family here? Probably not, but I also wouldn't recommend you move your family to a small town in northern Louisiana or southern Arkansas. However, along Padre Island in Corpus Christi, I even considered looking into rental properties myself. This place is absolutely gorgeous, and Corpus Christi really gets a bad rep for being so close to the US-Mexico border, having some incredible beaches, and some of these small towns in the border region of Texas are not too far away from some awesome beaches along Padre Island, which is just another incentive to live in this area if you don't mind having people running across your backyard at midnight. Some further research into Zapata showed that there's musical artists that are actually quite famous that have homes right in this town, not inside of gated communities. I mean, just literally in the town, there's famous people walking around. So this border safety concern, all this madness you've heard is actually not real. You have like literally rich, famous people that live in this region of the state, and their houses are just like where you can walk up to them and see them. So while in fact there's a lot of misinformation about these border towns, they're no different than any other small town in Alabama or Arkansas or anywhere else in the United States. In fact, there's businesses going in, which is quite difficult of an achievement for small towns in USA, as you rarely see small towns that are having considerably large houses built unless there's beaches or mountains or other attractions nearby. So overall, you can say that economically the area seems very sound, considering it's actually pretty remote. The oil industry is big in Texas, and not even a lot of people in Texas have ventured across the entire scope of the state to understand how important oil actually is in Texas. A lot of people in Houston were telling me recently on some of my videos that oil isn't that important for Texas. You're really mistaken. You need to drive across the entire length of the state to comprehend how massive these oil rigging areas are, drilling wells and all that. It just covers a huge span of Texas. And along the border towns in a lot of areas, this is a prime source of income. Does this area have problems related to crime? Absolutely. But guess what? The entire country has areas that are completely destroyed due to criminal activity. And while Texas is just a passing ground, you could say, from point A to point B, it really isn't the epicenter of where you see the absolute worst damage of the times we're living in today. A lot of places in the United States are the absolute epicenter of the crime and illicit activities. Places like Philadelphia, Kensington in particular, Baltimore, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Hey, pretty much any large city in the United States, even large cities like Denver, Colorado, which have beautiful scenic backdrops and incredibly beautiful suburbs. Somewhere in the metropolitan area, there's an absolute epicenter where you can fully see on display how these things damage people's lives. So after seeing 10 states of America in a matter of about 2 weeks, I come back to my home city of Fort Myers, and driving down Palm Beach Boulevard, I just can't help but notice how many people here are living absolutely in a destroyed state, and how blatantly open some illicit activities take place here, which could definitely not happen that way along the US-Mexico border due to the massive police presence there, which goes to show that when we put pressure in one place, all that does is funnel the crime and bad activities somewhere else. Because at the end of the day, the demand for the things that are going through the US-Mexican border don't originate in these bad border towns as they're labeled. They originate here in your community, in your backyard, and on your way to work. Texas is only a middle point between the person who produces and the person who consumes. And the person who consumes is right here in your backyard. To me, it didn't seem like the US-Mexican border was that dangerous of a place. In fact, some of the beaches along Padre Island, some of the most beautiful natural areas I've seen in the United States, and the Mexican-American culture and music that has originated from this part of the country is definitely some of the most beautiful things that we can be proud of. From the Mexican food to the beautiful music, it's a place we should really cherish and visit and explore as we go through America. Now, I'm not going to tell you that these border towns are worth seeing because it's just a rural place like anywhere else in America. But if you've never been to Corpus Christi, I definitely recommend that you explore the Texas border all the way down to Mexico. These are some of the most beautiful beaches, and you'll be completely safe. You'll meet some of the most friendly people you'll ever get to meet. listen to some Selena on the way there, and enjoy all of the beautiful cultures that are within America, a country that was founded from the Polish, from the Irish, from the German, from English, from Spaniards, and also from Mexican Americans, a beautiful country with many cultures all throughout. When you visit America, you'll find places like Louisiana and Maine that are influenced by the French. You'll find places like Mexico, New Mexico, Colorado, California that are influenced by their Mexican American culture. You'll find places like the Northeast that have a stronger English influence. You'll find places like Louisville, Kentucky, where there's small Irish communities. All of these different backgrounds create one of the most beautiful countries in the world, the United States of America, with all 50 states each having their own culture, their own food, and their own heritage. So there it is, the US-Mexico border, the beautiful state of Texas. It's a region just like any other in the United States with beautiful people and beautiful culture.